When Jesus delivered what has come to be known as the Sermon on the Mount, he was not actually preaching to a congregation. The story tells us that he saw this multitude of people and he actually went up into a mountain. He went to get away from the crowd. And when he was settled in, the story tells us, his disciples came to him. So I guess you could say he was preaching to the choir, or maybe holding a board meeting. Many scholars believe that the Sermon on the Mount is actually a collection of quotes and sayings, a book of aphorisms from which Jesus and other teachers could draw. It reads very much like one precept after another, like the book of Proverbs. So in one story, he tells his disciples, "Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves." Now, those of you who know me, I'm not too happy about that phony metaphor. Talk about false prophecy. Canis lupus has gotten a bad rap all through history. Wolves are almost universally hated and maligned. And just so you know, there has never been one case documented of a healthy wolf attacking a person in the wild. Doesn't happen. Wolves are magnificent social animals who thrive by association. They are loyal, faithful, and affectionate. I also know a few in cages who would like to rip me apart. But that's our fault. But, meanwhile, the moral to the message of Jesus is this: be careful to whom you listen. Guard your associations. He said, "You shall know them by their fruits." I kind of prefer the way that Friedrich Nietzsche said it. Association with other people corrupts our character, especially when we have none. When James Luther Adams, like myself, a former Baptist fundamentalist, rejected his childhood faith and became a Unitarian minister, he went to Germany in 1935 to study under the greatest theologians of the times. He experienced there the Nazi rise to power, and it changed his life. He became part of the underground church movement. He was detained by the Gestapo and nearly imprisoned. He saw firsthand the failure of so-called liberal theology to resist the rise of Hitler. He later wrote of his experience. In Nazi Germany, I soon came to the question, what is it in my preaching and my political action that would stop this? It is a liberal attitude, he wrote, to say that we keep ourselves informed and read the best papers on these matters and listen to NPR. He didn't say that, but he could have. Perhaps join a voluntary association now and then, but to be involved so that it costs, and so that one exposes the evils of society, requires something more than an attitude. It requires a sense that there's something wrong and I must be different from the way I have been. I must be changed. It requires something like conversion, he said, using an old Baptist term. We must wake up to the reality of evil and injustice and our own complicity. James Luther Adams became the most important Unitarian theologian of the 20th century. He continually criticized the liberal church for its excessive individualism. Still haunts us. He said a liberal faith has got to be about more than freedom of conscience to believe or not believe, more than just broad-minded attitudes. We are not isolated individuals, and the evils of society demand a clear and organized response. Amen? The aim of religious community and religious life must be radical change. That is prophetic. Adams called it the prophethood of all believers. He said we live our ethics not by what we think or preach or even in our individual actions, but in the relationships and institutions to which we commit ourselves. He, like Jesus, warned against false prophecy. But instead of, you shall know them by their fruits, Adams declared, you shall know them by their groups. August 6, 2006. Kevin wrote, a church is born. 50 people come to the opening for All Souls. After 18 months of training provided by the UUA, the Chrysalis Way, and Evensong, and small group meetings, and district gatherings, and General Assembly, 13 members signed the book. Then more come and pass the torch and spread the light of hope, the fire of their commitment throughout this community. They know what it means to be Unitarian Universalist. Many, many energized eyes, inspired hands have watched and worked for this day. April 23, 2021. They knew when they wrote the All Souls bylaws. Article 2, denominational affiliation. This congregation shall be a member of the UUA. It is the intention of this congregation to make annual financial contributions equal to its full fair share as determined by the association. So, we emerge from our cocoon, our chrysalis, our 15-year hibernation, our quiescent pupa, to become a card-carrying member of the UUA. And if you believe that we have been quiescent or hibernating, you don't know enough about this congregation. Kevin prepared a church timeline from which I drew a lot of this information. Here is but a small list of accomplishments. We know about donations to local charities and justice programs, Habitat for Humanity, Bread of Life, many others. There have been marches for peace and racial equality and gay pride, study circles and solstice parties, discussion groups and movie nights. Now, here we are, one of the member congregations who covenant with all the other UU churches to affirm and promote our principles. We are official. We are larger than ourselves. And we are strong. It's right there in the UUA bylaws. Article 2. Which says, as a free congregation, we enter into this covenant, promising to one another our mutual trust and support. The one another we are promising there is not one another, the individual members of this church. It is all the other 1,000 congregations who make up our American Association. We join in partnership with all these other churches in a perilous historic time. It isn't far-fetched to say that we, like Adams in Germany, face a crisis of democracy. The latest issue of the UU World, a quarterly that all of our 30 members ought to be now receiving. It's a benefit of membership. This quarterly publication is a special edition focused entirely on the topic of democracy. In it, the Reverend Susan Frederick Gray, Frederick-Gray, president of our Unitarian Universalist Association, said this: we have reached a watershed moment that will determine how we move forward as a nation. We have never lived up to the promise of justice for all. We, the people, has never included everyone. It is easy, Reverend Susan said, to feel overwhelmed by the challenges before us. The pandemic, white supremacy, voter suppression laws. We must stay engaged and organized. We must draw strength, joy, and hope from one another and from all we have accomplished. And let me say that UUs have accomplished much, particularly in the last year, a year of pandemic. 2019 and 2020, UU the Vote was a campaign launched in the hopes that it would reach 1 million voters. In the end, she wrote, we reached over 3 million people. We were crucial in the Georgia runoff elections. And guess who are our distinguished Ware lecturers at General Assembly this year? Stacey Abrams. We have co-lecturers this year, Stacey Abrams, and we have fantastic Ware lecturers every year. Stacey Abrams and Desmond Meade, one of our own Floridians, who is Let me say, some of you may not know, so I'll read it. A formerly homeless returning citizen who overcame many obstacles to eventually become the president of the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, chair of Floridians for a Fair Democracy, a graduate of Florida International University College of Law, and a Ford Global Fellow. He is the author of Let My People Vote, My Battle to Restore the Rights of Returning Citizens, published by our own Beacon Press, October of 2020. Recognized by Time Magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in the world in 2019. Desmond presently leads efforts to empower and civilly re-engage local communities across the state and to reshape local, state, and national criminal justice policies. You go, Desmond. Be sure you tune in for those. They will be worth it. I have been involved with All Souls for a long time. In fact, and I just learned this doing this research, I've been involved since meeting Gay and Kevin, I should say, at the 45th Annual General Assembly, 2006, St. Louis, Missouri. I went to St. Louis to find out about Palatka Church. Don't let that happen with everyone. And my first sermon here, which I just learned, was August 13th, the very next week after your big 50 gathering. I did not realize that until. Since then, I have preached, by my count, 146 times from your pulpit. Our chalice lighting today and some of the music were part of my first worship experience here. I shared a story that day from Denise Davidoff, former moderator and chairperson of our association. Denny passed away of cancer in December 2017, shortly after participating in her 50th consecutive General Assembly. Now, keep in mind there's only been 59, and at the time of her passing, only 56. In my first GA in Spokane, Washington, Denny told a personal story about a time when she and her husband were entertaining guests in their home. One of her visitors, a close friend, turned to her unexpectedly and asked, "Denise, how did you get to be this way? I have known you for a long time. I know your family well. You have not always been the way you are now. How did you get to be this way?" After thinking it over for some time, Denise finally came to the conclusion, I got to be this way because I have fallen totally, irrevocably, head over heels in love with Unitarian Universalists. A lot of water has passed under my hull since then. My life has taken twists and turns I never imagined. But through it all, my faith in this association and its principles has been a guiding light. I have become, if anything, more radical, more liberal, more understanding of the desperate need this world has for the light that we can offer and the hope that we can bring. And when people ask me, how did you get to be this way? I can point to the ministers I have known the congregations I have served, the churches full of friends and fellow travelers, I can point to people like you and say, blame them. They are how I got to be this way. You shall know them by their fruit.